Hello, everyone. We will continue to study the book, A Manual for Preaching by Abraham Kuruvilla. And right now we are on chapter 4, which is creating maps. So last time we talked about deriving application and then discerning theology. And the first one is getting ready. I hope you see the progression that we're doing. First, in getting ready, I want to remind you that that's the time you need to reread and let the passage sink into you. And also, that's the time that you would look into the historical context, literary context, the background of the text. So that's for the getting ready, right? So spend time to that, do that. And with that, you will discern theology. And in discerning theology, as you look into the background, historical background, literary context, you would see, oh, this is the meaning of this one. Oh, that's why it's like this, because they experienced these things. It's because the background is saying that it's like that. So with that, you can discern the theology. When I say theology, it's all about God. It's all about what God is doing. And so actually we are being reminded of the word doing. That means, what does the author really wants to say? Okay, so that's the theology of that passage or pericope. So please also be reminded that the theology is God's ideal in his kingdom. And it's always fulfilled through Jesus Christ. So in our theology, you can start that. For example, 1 Peter 5, verse 7, God cares for us. You can also start with God, his character, who he is. And then along the way, you can also add the fulfillment of this thing through Christ. Yan. And then the next one is deriving application. So after learning that God cares for us, for example, then the application could be trust him or cast your cares on him, since the verse says so. So we are very being true to the verse, even also to the application, because we derive or we come up with the right theology. So please remember those things. And now as we continue on in creating maps, that means you need to put those things in mind already. And then as we create the maps, those you have studied, those you have researched, those theology you have discerned already, we will put it there in these maps. So let's begin. Let me share to you the screen. Sorry, it was not opened yet. So let me open it first. Okay. Again, let me share the screen. Okay, creating maps. You will see here the first chart is called the fundamental shape of the sermon. Here, the sermon is divided into three parts, three main parts. Number one is introduction, which consists of 15% only of the whole sermon in terms of speaking it and in terms of the manuscript. Okay, so remember that one. Your introduction shouldn't be 50%. Then the body is actually 75%. There's a second part of the sermon. 75%, that means it's the biggest part of the sermon. And then later on, we will divide that 75%. And then the conclusion is actually only 10%. It's a summary. It's the totality of what you've delivered. So it's just 10%. Then that's it. Okay. So a sermon has this traditional approach. They look into the sermon like this, but then the author, Abraham Kuruvilla, is giving us a fresh approach of a sermon. For example, a sermon is or an argumentation. And it's very rampant to us right now. That whenever we think of a sermon, it seems like we're going to defend something. We want to argue, and our statement, parang we would like to make sure that we can prove our statement. or the theology that we have gotten to it, you know. But then a fresh approach of a sermon is that it's a demonstration. Okay, so you demonstrate what you have learned from your study, something like that, and then of what? Of the big idea. That's a traditional approach, okay, or what the text is saying. So if you have find out that this is what the text is saying, so we call that the big idea for the traditional approach. But then for the fresh approach, you know, which is the author is sharing to us, it's more on an experience, okay? So it's a demonstration of an experience, or what we call the text doing. So meaning you also should go through the text and experience the text to know that this is the doing of the text. This is the theological focus or the theology of the text, something like that. So it's more on demonstration of the experience, which comprises for traditional approach points with propositions, right? Okay, so we put their point 1, 2, and 3, and then every points have propositions why we choose these points. Now, for the fresh approach, the author labeled it as moves, and then with labels. After this, I will tell you what are those moves. Now, with these moves, it will be kind of smooth, you know? So let's see that later on. That are, for the traditional approach, organized. We often do this one. Okay, there's the big idea, and then these are the points, and then with propositions, then we organize it. But then for a fresh approach, he called it shaped. Okay, so it parang just like, you know, a pattern you're shaping. It's smooth, right? When we do shaping. So the author is leading us to the smoothness of the sermon into an or a, for the traditional approach, outline, but for a fresh approach, he called it a map, into a map. So what is that map? I'll be telling you later on. Now let us move first with this one. So what we did last time is we get the passage, which is the text, and then here is the move that he's saying, the primary move, which is the discerning theology. Okay, so that's what we learned. That the first thing we will do after, you know, looking into the passage, after knowing what is the saying of the passage, as the literary context, historical background, then the primary move, the first move you're about to do is to discern the theology. Oh, this is it. And so we call it pericopal theology. So we arrived into the pericopal theology. Now the secondary move is the deriving application. So we move into the application. So we look into the theology that we have discerned, and then we try to derive the application, and then that's it. So those are the two moves, primary move and secondary move. Kindly remember those terms. Now, the fundamental shape of a sermon. Oh, so here is the table I showed you first, introduction, body, conclusion. Now, the body can be divided like this. The primary move or the discerning theology is 50%. That means here in the 50%, half of your sermon, you will talk about this the text is saying, and then we learn that from this text is the theology of the text. Okay, and then on the secondary move, 25%, you are now deriving application. Okay, so this, since this what what's the theology of the text, then we realize that we should do this is the application of this text, and that is 25%. And that is your body here, which is 75%. So this is a very fundamental shape of a sermon. I hope you would put this in mind. You will remember this every time you make a sermon, that, hey, my introduction should be short, 15% only. Then my body will be 75%. Most of it is the discerning theology, and then half of that is deriving application, then conclusion, okay? Now, it could also be this way also, primary move or discerning theology 1 is 25%, and then discerning theology 2, and 25%, and then the secondary move or deriving application 25%. Now, here's the thing here. It says here, including a sub-move relevance, including a sub-move relevance. Now, in every discerning theology, it's possible that you would speak something about its relevance or somehow about application also. So it means seemingly you're spreading the application to the different parts of the sermon. So discerning theology. Okay, siguro on this first point, you realize that, for example, God cares for you. And then what's the relevance of that one? So in this situation, in our situation right now, whenever we think that no one cares for us, then we should remember that God cares for us. And then your second point or discerning theology 2 could be, so you should cast your cares to him, or casting your cares upon him. That involves humility and submission. So you would talk about it, and then at the end, you would put some idea there that they should be humble and submit to God. Ayan. And then deriving application, you put in there the full application that you want them to do. It can be like simple words like, that's it, cast your cares on him, something like that. Now, here's another sample, or how do you divide the 75%? If you have 1, 2, 3, 4 points, imagine. Usually it's 3 points that we use, o kaya 2 points lang, no? But if you have 1, 2, 3, 4 points or discerning theology or primary move, then it could be 15%, 15%, 15%, and then the last application is 15%. So you divide it that way. So they have equal distribution. They have equal time that you would speak on them. Now, oftentimes you would encounter the words inductive or deductive sermons. What are those? And should we use them? Deductive preaching moves from a general statement of sermon purpose to the more specific facts regarding that purpose. This is very common, right? Declare main ideas, then propositions, points, or spiritual truths concerning the theme. Oftentimes, when we are given topics or theme, then from this theme, we're gonna, get the sermon out of it, get the points out of it. It's called deductive preaching. The inductive sermons move from specific truths. Okay, here are the points, here are the examples, here are the ideas, and then into the text of the general truth of the sermon. You come up with a general truth, usually revealed at the end of the sermon. So parang, parang siguro verse by verse or yung text by text na sermon. Na okay, ito yung sabi ng mga text or verses, and then at the end, this is the general truth. We conclude that this is about unity of the believer, something like that. So that's inductive. Now, the author said both are unfruitful. Instead, the preacher is to curate the text for the audience so that the theology of the pericope, an irreducible entity, is discerned with all its power and pathos. The preacher then guides listeners into life change by deriving application. Now, what is curate? What does it mean by curate or curating or being a curator? That means, okay, how did you derive or how did you discern the theology? You presented the historical background, the literary context, you presented the ideas or the text of, or what is it all about? Parang the same journey you had, you will just present the same journey to the people in your sermon. And then you would allow them to go to that journey so that they would arrive to the theology of that text. Parang you let them be persuaded to that theology through the journey that you have experienced you yourself upon arriving to that theology. Okay, so parang as curating means you would just present to them what you have done, what you have seen, what you have researched, what you have discovered, and then lead them to the theology of that, and then to the application of that one. Something like that. So there's no twisting of anything. It seems like, okay, this is what I've researched, is what I've discovered, and then I'm presenting it to you. Then this is the theology of it, and then the application. You just, deliver it smoothly without any manipulation of the text or the idea or the theology. Now, guidelines for presentations of map. So as you make your outline or your map, I want to see these things. In numbering, main parts like introduction, body, and conclusion are not numbered. Okay, so we will be very organized, all of us, in this one. Remember this, the body numbering, the first level is Roman numeral, just like that. And then the second level is alphabet uppercase. And then the third level is Arabic numeral. And then fourth level, alphabet lowercase. Here's a sample. So here's the introduction. There's no numbering on it. And that's the body. And then if you will put some, points there, make sure it's a sentence so it can be easily understood by other people who are unfamiliar with your topic. Or if you can just put, phrases there, then it's supposed to be a very common sermon, or common topic that they can easily understand, even you just put phrase there. So it's better to still use full sentences. And then, so after the first level, with Roman numeral, you use uppercase, example A and B, and the second part, you put A there, uppercase, and then the numbers, Arabic numerals, 1, 2, or 3 onwards, and then under the number 1, there could be a lowercase a, lowercase b, something like that, and then you put number on the application, which is Roman numeral number 4, and every time you make an application, it's imperative. I believe this includes the appeal, although here in the Manual for Preaching book, I don't think the author talks about the appeal, but then for us who knows and believe the importance of appeal, we can put it here in the application part. Oftentimes for the appeal, we make it a question, right? And then I believe we can also put some imperatives on the application and the appeal part. So we will just combine that later on. At the end, we'll try to see how it can be put into the manuscript. And then conclusion. Now, I want to introduce to you what he called a canned map. Now, this is used for emergencies or limited time to prepare. So it is not very advisable, but just in case you need to sermon and then you have a very limited time, you usually do this, or you can usually do this and use this. There are 2 types of canned map. Number 1 is problem, solution, application. Very easy, right? 3 points lang. And then number 2, saying, doing, and then application. So let's look into this. For example, Proverbs 13 verse 20, the one walking with the wise will become wise, but the one dealing with the foolish will suffer detriment. So the problem is keeping the company of fools leads to suffering. Okay, you will suffer detriment. So if you keep on being with fools, then you will be led to that. And then the solution is keeping the company of the wise, because it precludes suffering. And then the application, keep company with the wise. Okay, it somehow look very simple, right? And you can even preach this. That's possible. No problem with that. But then if we will try to make it the other way around, not as a canned map, then we can put more details in it. And we can emphasize more of the things that's needed to be said. Another one, saying, doing, and application. The story is 1 Samuel 15. This actually is a story of Saul, who disobeyed God. Well, God told him to destroy all the Amalekites, even the man, woman, child, everything. But then Saul, King Saul, didn't do that. He heed to the voice of the people who wants to keep the best from the Amalekites, like the sheep. And then he said that, oh, they want to keep that, so that they could use those animals to sacrifice to the Lord. Now, the saying part, what we will do is that you will retell the story briefly. So para siyang narrative or narration of the story. And then on the doing part, you would say that the one committed to God listens to the voice of God, not the voice of worldly seductions. So King Saul, listened to the voice of worldly seductions. But then look at Samuel, the opposite of Saul here is Samuel. Is the one committed to God, and he always listens to the voice of God. And then the application is listen to God's voice. Okay, so pwede, no? You can also use this one. But then the advice is that to use focus splitting. You remember we watched the video about expository sermon, and what we did there, the many examples there, is what we call focus splitting. Making your own map for a specific text different from the canned map. Example, Proverbs 15 verse 8, the sacrifice of the wicked is abominable to Yahweh, but the prayer of the upright his delight. So number 1 point, God's disgust at the worship of the wicked. Second, God's delight at the worship of the upright. And then lastly, application, what will you do? Delight God, something like that. Another one, Ephesians 1:15 to 23. So oftentimes you will have this theological focus. Now, how did we get this theological focus? We look into the verses one by one, and then we realize that from these verses, here are the things that are in it, okay? So we come up to this kind of long, but then oftentimes when we would create a theological focus after from this kind of long paragraph, you would try to make it one simple sentence, and then that's it. So hostile powers at work to oppose God's plan, and God's people are overwhelmed by God's incredible power in and through Christ, power that is extended toward believers, the body of Christ, his fullness as Christ reigns. So how do we split this one? For the problem solution application, this is very simple. It's like this. The problem, our fearfulness of our powerful supernatural foes. And the solution, God's powerfulness against any foe manifests in and through the reigning Christ for believers. And then the application, live powerfully. But if you will try focus splitting, it will be like this. Hostile forces opposing God's plan. That is coming from chapter 1, verse 21. Okay? So you would talk about that, hostile forces opposing God's plan. Then on the second part, God's overwhelming power in and through Christ. You would emphasize that more. That is coming from verses 15 to 20. And then lastly, believers' power in Christ as his body. So here you can see na you can give time to certain things like the believers, and then God's overwhelming power, and then also for different, diba? They're different from one another. It's not also the problem solution or the saying doing thing. So it's kind of different from the two canned map, but it's very nice because you're being true to the text or to the word, and then you're putting more details on it, and you are discussing more detailed part of the passage. And then finally, the application is actually the same, live powerfully. You see here, the application is usually imperative, and as we learned last time, it must be specific, ano pa nga yun, focus, something like that. So it depends upon your audience also. And not too long, it should be striking, so it will be easily remembered, just like this, live powerfully. So lastly, we are reminded to preach or preaching seamlessly. Meaning preach sermons like we tell stories. It must be smoothly. We must preach smoothly. And that is possible if we have maps, right? So remember those maps. More importantly, the maps, which is like this one. Let me bring back or show it. Yeah, like this. Like this, it can be 3 primary moves or 4, or like this one, only 2 primary moves and then secondary moves, something like that. So instead of going always to the canned moves, which is, or canned maps, which are easier, the suggested or the recommended is to go back to this one, either through primary moves and then secondary move, or 3 or 4 primary move and then secondary move. Meaning you would, focus splitting or split the theology focus, and then those will be the points there or the primary moves there, and then derived application. So that's it. I hope we can create our maps very soon, coming from the passage that we have researched upon. And then, yes, we have a focus or an audience for that passage already. And then we derived application on that already. Now what we will do is just to put it there on the maps. And then later on, we would put the details on every moves that is here, or that is in our outline or in our maps. So please go back to your assignments. Make sure to pass your assignments. I will just be commenting on them one by one, whether you're doing it right or there are things that you need to revise. We cannot deal with it here, all of them, but I'll just comment on your assignment one by one. So it's very important for you to pass your assignments, so I would know if you understand it and how would I let you know how to do it. So that's it. God bless everyone and see you again next week.